Please welcome Dr. Kurush Dalal with a very warm round of applause.
Is it working?
So, this first time I'm hearing somebody blow whistles for a man. So good, you've got fans.
Are those guys blowing whistles or girls blowing whistles?
Okay, so thank you very much for that whistling welcome. And thank you, Gino, and the organizers of Mindscape for calling me here. And all of you all who are waiting this long to listen to me. So, after hearing about madness and hearing about leopards in Mumbai, this is going to probably be a pretty tame talk. Um, I'm an archaeologist by training, and I also happen to be a caterer by profession. So, I grew up listening to all the wrong stories. Um, when everybody else was listening to nice lullabies and happy stories and stuff from the Panchatantra, I was listening to stories of the sack of Persepolis by Alexander and, bloodthirsty tales of revenge and retribution that my mother told me about. She was also an archaeologist. So I kind of keep telling her that she's responsible for me turning out this way. We realized at some point that archaeology wasn't a paying proposition in the 60s and 70s, and my mother kind of segued into a business doing catering. So I grew up with the business, I learned the business, and I had a great passion for archaeology. I did my master's, I did a PhD, and then I realized that there were really no jobs in archaeology. So I went back to being a caterer. I kept teaching off and on, lecturing here and there, like this one over here. And then one day, somebody at the university called me for a few lectures, and the gentleman who called me quit. So I asked whether, the post was empty and I could move in, and they said, "Would you really want to?" And I said, "I'd love to." So at the age of 42, I got a job doing archaeology. So for those of you all who think it's a very viable profession, that's not really such a great idea, unless you got Plan B. So I had Plan A. This was Plan B for me. Uh, I spent a lot of years doing archaeology, and I'm going to tell you guys this: there are professions and there are professions. A lot of us, when they get to my ripe old age, realize that they haven't been doing for a living that which they love. I've been incredibly lucky. Both the things that I do for a living, catering and archaeology, are things that I absolutely love doing. I mean, you can look at me, right? So, uh, there was a time when I spent an enormous amount of time out in the field. It's still the best thing. The Bombay, Calcutta, Delhi kind of culture, the cities of India, are good fun. They're cosmopolitan, they're nice. The creature comforts are there. But there's nothing like being out in the villages of India. And archaeology took me north, south, east, west. I mean, not too far east. I've got to work out that in the next few years. But I've been all over, from UP to Tamil Nadu, from Gujarat to Bengal, excavating, working in rural areas, seeing the real India, living with the real people of India and eating an enormously widely diverse range of foods because you're eating in the villages, not in the cities. What's happened is in the last 20 or 25 years is that there has been this enormously rampant globalization. The world is now one village and, pretty sayings like that. But it actually is. There's an enormous amount of food that we don't eat any longer. And as an archaeologist, it's kind of something that strikes home right in the face. I excavate sites where we see an enormous diversity in food. Okay, maybe not at each site itself, but in the sum total of all the sites, we see a huge diversity of food. And then you look at the kind of food we're eating today, and you realize that more than half the food that we eat today is foreign. And that's nice, I mean, the whole global village concept, but it's a bit weird. I mean, there's an enormous amount of Indian food, or traditionally autochthonous food, that we just don't eat any longer. And I've kind of, through the years, kept on thinking about talking about archaeology and food and bringing the two together. Talking about the more technical aspects of how archaeologists actually dig up remains and analyze them, and what is it from those remains that go into analyzing food. At the same time, talk about the kind of food that we've lost. Let me give you a very, very simple test of this thing. Is there anybody here who doesn't like potatoes? Is there anybody here who hasn't eaten potatoes? Anybody? No. So, potatoes were like totally part and parcel of our lives. Going through college, vada pav was what kept me going, and if I had little more money, it was masala dosa. If I really had a lot of money, I wanted to impress a girl, it was pav bhaji. So there's potatoes, potatoes, and more potatoes. Okay, guess what? There were no potatoes in India till 400 years ago. Potatoes don't grow in India. Potatoes don't even grow in the old world. Potatoes grow in South America. The Portuguese brought them to Europe, and then they brought them to India. Ditto for tomatoes. No carrots. And this is probably going to be the real shocker if you don't already know it. No chilies at all. Imagine that. Indian food had no chilies. Asian food had no chilies. So no tom yum soup, no Thai green curry, red curry, definitely no Malwani rasa, no Pandra rasa from Kolhapur. None of that was happening. There were just no chilies. Well, actually, all of it was happening. There were substitutes, there were other things that we used. And one of the reasons why most of the Europeans came to India was because of the spices that we already had. And the number one spice as far as the spice trade was concerned was pepper. Now, it's not the same pepper that we eat. There was a separate kind of pepper called piper longum. You still get it. It's a little more difficult to crush, and it's about this big. And it's like an entire clove of peppercorns glued together, tiny peppercorns. So if you ever go to a traditional herbalist or a healer's place, or you go to an Ayurvedic shop and you ask for lendi pipli, he'll give this to you. And once you get used to probably eating it, if you do, you realize it's got a far funkier taste than regular pepper does. So there have been tons and tons of things like this in India that we used. Imagine no peanuts. What would you do with your beer? No peanuts. Yeah, no peanuts. Stop. Peanuts come from America. So there's an enormous amount of American stuff that's come to India, sir. Every time my friends in the right wing get very upset about Western influences, I've been telling them they've been around for 400 years. You go to Gujarat and tell the Gujaratis that they can't have their peanuts and they can't have their potatoes, and you'll have a revolution on your hands. Okay? So that's what food is all about, and the history of food is all about. So if you didn't know about the archaeology of food, you'd probably think that peanuts and potatoes were always Indian. Beer actually was, but there were no peanuts in those days. So what did we eat? What were our food habits? And exactly how does archaeology get around to working around it is, what this is all about. So for those of you who might not know, just a little introduction to archaeology. So everybody thinks archaeology is the study of the past. That's kind of incorrect. Archaeology is actually the study of the past in the present. So whatever I'm excavating exists here and now. It's not the past, it's the remnants of the past. And I use those remnants of the past I find today to reconstruct yesterday or whenever it was. So that's kind of maybe nitpicking to a certain extent, but what I'm trying to tell you is that basically we work with garbage. I mean, garbology wouldn't sound nice, archaeology sounds a lot better. So we work with leftovers, discards, and listening to the last speaker talk about scat and things like that reminds me of my days in college and my paleontology professor telling me about this amazingly large piece of funny shaped mass that was lying there. And I said, this is bizarre, what kind of fossil is this? And he said, that's dinosaur tongue. And I was like, okay. So, well, yeah, you get all kinds of things. Dinosaur dung at least is petrified solid and like stone. You get human dung. And they actually put in a pressure cooker to revitalize it so that they can study it. I never went and ate at my paleobotany professor's place after that. So, yeah, who knows what you've been using this pressure cooker for? So, that's the kind of stuff that we do in archaeology, and it's great fun. We spend a lot of nights out in the open. We camp amongst tents. We eat all kinds of bizarre stuff. Participate in the most amazing ceremonies, which the locals either organize for us or we coax them into organizing. I've done the whole moonless night, chicken black, skull cup, and your hairs rise up, and the priest suddenly gets up, this old quavering voice priest suddenly gets all revitalized because he's drunk a cup full of blood. He hasn't told you that there's a decent bit of opium at the bottom of it. So, yeah, it's basically stone, but it's good fun. So, all that was part of archaeology. So, archaeology was something that I really enjoyed doing, and I seriously recommend it to anybody who's got plan B. So, that said, let's get to the more serious stuff. Okay, so basically, almost everything in archaeology can be used, or part of it can be used, to reconstruct food. So we basically have four main headings as such, as we call them. So we have paleobotanists who reconstruct the botanical past. We have archaeozoologists who reconstruct the animal past. We have paleoanthropologists who study human remains. And believe me, there's an enormous amount of stuff that can be said about you from your bones. I mean, you are what you eat is actually true. And finally, we have the excavators themselves and the ceramics that they excavate. So, okay. So paleobotanists basically study ancient plant remains, and this is how they basically study them. So all the material that we get, we pass through sieves. So what you see on the top corner over there, this is what we call dry sieving. And it's one of the most fun things to do because if you remember your mother telling you not to play in the dirt, this is when you do it officially. So all those guys who kind of deprived when they were kids, they become archaeologists. So that actually is not the best way to do things because most plant remains are microscopic. And most plant remains wouldn't survive from the past. Once they were buried in the ground, they disintegrate. So essentially what archaeologists look for is areas where there's been burning and areas where there's been cooking. So the area immediately next to a kitchen stove. Now you look at a stove on a nice large platform with tiles of marble under it, which gets cleaned out every time you work. What you got to look at is how things were in the past. When the stove was at ground level, the stove was made of clay. The area around it was made of clay, and anything that fell out could get charred and buried in the same clay. So all these hearths and hearth areas are basically what we look at, and we do this thing called wet sieving. So it's an incredibly technically complex process. Basically you take a lot of mud and pour a lot of water into it, and then you take a large stick and you kind of make what we call mud Manchurian. Okay, so that's the mud Manchurian. And then you wait for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then you take a lot of small plastic sieves and you run them through like this, and you patch them onto pieces of beautifully scientifically laid out newspaper. So the newspaper absorbs the water, dries quickly, and then you collect whatever's on it. Essentially anything that's carbonized is light and rises up. Okay, so that's what you end up with. And then you put it under a microscope, and that's what you get. Those rootlets are all modern, by the way. Ancient rootlets don't survive. We also get beautiful sickles like this and impressions of different plants from the past. Again, rice impressions. Now, we've been playing this game in archaeology with the Chinese for the last 30 or 40 years. We've been at kind of a undeclared war with China since the 60s. So the archaeologists felt that as true-blooded Indians, when you cut our hands, saffron white and green bleeds out of us. So we've got to do the same thing. So the Chinese and the Indians have this long-running feud on who's got the earliest rice. And this is a big thing, especially for the Chinese, because if we had rice before them, that's like a total insult and we've lost face. So Indian excavators said we had rice at 3000 BC. So about 10 years later, the results came out from a Chinese excavation. They said we got rice at 4000 BC. So the Indians went back to the field, and now we got rice at 5000 BC. And then the Chinese went back to the field and they got rice at 5300 BC. And now we've got rice at 5450 BC. And the good fight goes on. So this is one of the big exciting things. I mean, I know it's difficult to get excited about this. I mean, I could see my professor getting like totally worked up when he was telling me this, and I was like, yeah, really. Okay. So the other big thing is what we call archaeozoology, where archaeozoologists basically study the bone remains, the tooth remains, the shell remains, and all the animal products that survive in the archaeological record. Now, unlike the plant remains, which are normally microscopic, the animal remains, thankfully, are mostly large enough to see. Nowadays, just because all the paleobotanists were hogging all the microscopes, the archaeozoologists have also decided that they also need to look at some microscopic stuff. So they look at mites and things like that, but that's like really weird. So the main thing is that there are tons and tons of animal remains at any site. So let me put it to you in a really brutally honest manner, and this I'm serious about, I'm not joking about. If Ram lived 5,000 years ago, he ate beef. Serious, guys. The number one animal protein consumed by everybody 5,000 years ago was beef. Everybody ate animal protein. Vegetarianism was not an option. So if we want great antiquity for our mythological heroes, we have to take what comes along with them, the baggage that goes with them. And that, to a large extent, is what archaeology does for you. So, essentially, okay, really bad color choice. So, non-food usage, food usage, scavenging at the site, how the remains get buried, what happens, and how they survive for archaeologists to select. So, a little. Okay, so why is this happening to me? I'm seriously technologically challenged. Okay, so basically there are two types of archaeological remains that we actually find. So this is what we call stray bones. Now, contrary to what the lady just said before us, don't leave your garbage outside your house. Prehistoric times, protohistoric times, historic times, everybody threw their garbage outside their houses, and they lived with leopards, and I think they probably had a good deal going. It kept the dog population down. Nowadays, we just keep binning all our garbage, and we deprive those dogs, and therefore we deprive the leopards, and maybe we should throw around more garbage. So we get stray bones, and we get articulated bones like this. So where you can see the joint, the bones still joined as though they still belong to part of a carcass, and these are normally from what we call butchering sites. So it wasn't like you picked your animal, took it to your living room, and slaughtered it. So there were butchering sites outside most villages, most towns, and you find entire heads, you find lower limbs which were not eaten, discarded over there. So this gives us a very good idea about the number of individuals being slaughtered in a period at a site. I know. So basically we dig out the archaeological material, we sort it out, we wash them on site, we dry them, because normally a lot of calcareous remains and things like that get stuck to bones, and then we take them back to the labs to work on. Now, the glamour of archaeology is there for the excavators who dig out the stuff. They get to do the fun things. But the actual archaeology that gets done, about maybe 2/3 of it, is done back in labs with little petri dishes and little trays and going through dusty bags of bones, cursing the bloody excavator who brought so many bones back. So he couldn't have bugger just thrown away a couple of gunny bags. I mean, did he have to do this to me? Okay, so a lot of statistics get used. Is this thing working? So an enormous amount of statistics get used to figure out the number of individuals of any species that we have, the different animals that are being cut up, the different animals that are being eaten, and this gives us a pretty good idea of what kind of farming processes are going on. Yeah, clicking and leaving. Okay, so the other big thing that we have is what we call paleoanthropology, which is the study of human remains. Now, contrary to today's human beings who are really nasty to archaeologists and cremate all their dead and don't leave anything behind for us to study, in the past people were really nice. They buried their dead, which meant that we can dig them up, right? So after the first time, actually it pales a bit digging up a skeleton. I once spent about 20 days with 400 individuals stacked up in plastic boxes next to me, and I had somebody come down and say, "Oh my God, you're sleeping with 400 dead bodies." And I was like, "Yeah, by the way, yeah, there are dead bodies there, there." So it kind of becomes very matter of fact after some time. So what is it that we study in these human remains? So essentially we look at deficiencies. Now why do we look at deficiencies? This is where the story takes a bit of a twist. Human beings have been on this planet for about 2 million years. For most of that time, till about the last 10 to 12,000 years, we were hunter-gatherers. We selectively and steadily became better and better killing machines. Our diet was almost exclusively carb-free. And no, it's not the paleo diet that they talk about now, that's ridiculous. Okay, you probably would have a serious problem living on a Paleolithic diet, most of your guys. I would. We essentially ate an enormous amount of animal protein, along with which we subbed it with fruit and root and sometimes some plant remains, some plants. But essentially our diet was meat, meat and more meat. And by about 25,000 to 40,000 years ago, when anatomically modern human beings start populating the whole world, man had become the ultimate killing machine. We had become so good at the job that it took less than 4 hours of work a day to make sure that you could feed your family. I would have liked to live at that time. So it gave you a lot of time for all those other abstract pursuits that today are so much and so importantly an intrinsic part of our lives. Art, poetry, music, storytelling. Okay? So all this that we take for granted today is thanks to the fact that we did not have to spend the whole day feeding ourselves. That we had the time to sit and think, to sit and look around. So that's anatomically modern human beings living incredibly healthy lives, almost no salt in their diet unless it's coming from their meat, almost no carbohydrates in the diet unless they're coming from plant sugars, okay, and I mean fruits, not grains. And then you have farmers. Farmers whose diet is protein poor, incredibly carbohydrate rich, very, very poor in minerals, very, very poor in vitamins, okay? And they're all basically really sick people, most of the first farmers. And that came as quite a shock when archaeologists first started looking at the remains of dead human beings or dead farmers. And the next question asked was, then why did they become farmers? If farming was such a crap life, okay, and you were permanently ill, your teeth were falling out, they were being ground down because you were forced to eat grain, why did people become farmers? And it was trying to understand these changes in food that we saw, which made us understand the changes in evolution, in cultural evolution. And what we realized at this point was that they did not become farmers because they wanted to. They became farmers because they had to. About 10,000 years ago, the last of the ice sheets that covered the northern hemisphere melted. And all the sea levels rose up massively. Till then, human hunter-gatherers numbered less than 2 million individuals on this entire planet. Today we are over 8 billion individuals. So that population of 2 million was maintained in a very interesting manner. Human beings were permanently nomadic or semi-nomadic. You had to keep moving in pursuit of your food. Your game animals moved, regions became depleted of plant resources. So you continuously moved, normally in a circular ambit in a zone that you were comfortable in, okay, or that you held proprietary rights to, and you were continuously moving. Now, when you are a continuously moving tribal population, there is a very interesting and what may sound to us a very horrible rule. It's called one child in arms. What it means is that a mother cannot have more than one child that she's carrying. If she does, she will not be able to keep the tribe, which means that all three of them will die. So if a second child is born when one child is still being carried, you expose it, leave it to the wild animals and walk away. Now it might sound, like I said, really cruel, especially if for all of us here who were second children or third children. Well, I know. But, that's the way it was. I was the first child, by the way. So, that said, why did they become farmers then? What happened was, as I told you, 10,000 years ago, the ice sheets melted, the sea levels rose up, the weather got really lovely. I mean, you might not think that the weather is lovely these days, but this is lovely weather compared to what it was. Lots of rainfall, lush grasslands, beautiful forests, lots of fruit, lots of animals, and tons of seafood suddenly becoming available on the continental shelves. So all the shellfish that you couldn't get because there was cold water was suddenly in these low areas of land that had been covered by these rising sea levels because the ice sheets melted. To give you an idea of how much ice melted, you guys know where Norway is? Norway, Sweden, Finland. So there was so much ice on top of Norway that when it melted, Norway rose up 300 meters. It was kind of like crushed down. There were 2 kilometers of ice on top of Norway. So all that water, all those warm water suddenly made for plentiful resources. Human beings did not need to move around too much. They became semi-sedentary. They could live in one place without having to move after food because there was more food than was, necessary. But there's a rule. It's called carrying capacity. What it means is that you can only have as many individuals as there is food. And what happened was, around 10,000 years ago when this took place, the period that we call the Mesolithic or the Middle Stone Age, there was suddenly a lot of food. We stayed in semi-permanent camps and we had lots and lots of children because we didn't need to keep moving around. We could have more than one child in arms. And face it, guys, there was no internet, there was no idea. I mean, evenings were long. So there were a lot of children. And suddenly, we realized that there wasn't quite enough food. So stronger groups forced weaker groups off their hunting grounds to corner more and more food. And weaker groups were forced to go to places where food was not available throughout the year. They were forced to grow their own food. So today when we look at the noble savage, the poor tribals who have been given such a hard time by farmers, basically it's just payback. I know, the anthropologist is not going to be very happy about this. So basically that's what it is, it's payback. I mean, they gave us such a hard time, we learned how to beat the game. We learned how to grow our own food. And it was only in those parts of the world where the wild ancestors of what was possible to be domesticated grew, that it was possible for us to grow that. So India grew rice in its east, barley in its west, wheat in its north, okay? And most of South India grew millets, different kinds of millets. So are you guys familiar with millets? Ragi? Yes, so ragi is a millet. Jowar, bajra, those are all millets. So that was the mainstay of peninsular India, okay? Not wheat, not rice. And along with it, cows, goats, sheep, later buffalo, and then pigs. The Chinese, for example, had only rice. They had no cows, or rather wild ancestors of cows. They had no wild ancestors of goats and sheep. So all they had was chickens, pigs, and rice. If you ever go to China or interact with Chinese people, you will find that there are almost no milk products in China. It's because most Chinese cannot digest milk. They don't have the enzymes in their stomachs to do so. That's part of their food history, their food archaeology. They didn't have the animals that produced milk. I mean, I've never heard of anybody milking a pig. And I know you can't milk a chicken. Okay? So just no milk, guys. So imagine, no kheer, no payasam, no barfi. What a terrible life. So, this is basically what we see when we look at, oops. So, this is the kind of stuff that we basically look at as, wow. So that's the difference between how well our food habits changed. Our entire jaw changed. So if you look at the top over here, this is one of our ancient ancestors, and see the size of his jaw over here, and see the size of ours. So a lot more chewing of plant material, and then we started eating lots and lots of meat. And this is how it decreased in size. So even the size of the teeth over here. So basically this is what you're looking at. These are farmers' teeth. Look at the missing teeth, the teeth that are completely ground down, the cavities that are there. So cavities and things like that are because, not just because of sugar, but because of eating atta, which is an enormous amount of carbs in it, which has an enormous amount of sugar in it. And grinding down that coarsely ground atta, because this kind of fine maida and stuff that you get is now very, very modern. Okay, so grinding that down day in and day out led to completely worn out teeth. This doesn't really happen in India, which kind of makes us archaeologists quite sad. But in parts of northern Europe, you have these large bogs, and you regularly have people that were sacrificed in these bogs. And after 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, when these bogs dry up and they're cut, we find intact bodies inside, which have got tanned to leather because of the high iron content in a bog and the lack of oxygen. So there's this guy called Tolun Man who was dug up, and they actually found his stomach intact. That's his stomach down there, by the way, guys. I know, gross. And they found that he had an undigested meal in his stomach. So the condemned man had been given a last meal of his choice before he was. So, archaeologists being the enterprising people that they were, and television being very new in the 70s in Europe, they decided to recreate his last meal. And they found it was a very funky porridge made up of flax, false flax, barley, and not grass. And they made it on television, so it was an event like this. There was an audience. They cooked it on the telly, and one of the most famous archaeologists of that time, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, was there to give commentary about the archaeology, like I'm doing here. And I wish. And then they were made to eat it. And as Wheeler said in his autobiography, it took 2 large whiskeys to keep it down. He said it was gross. It was boiled mush. Telling you how much we are used to flavoring our food now. Telling you how used it is that we are to spices, herbs, oils, aromatics in our food. Stuff that just didn't exist in those days. So this is the inside of a skull, and this shows you sickle cell anemia. This is because of, lack of iron in your food. And it's also because of malaria. So you're living in one place, you're doing your do right next to your house, you're leaving puddles of water, you're working in puddled water in your fields, perfect ground for mosquitoes, and this is what happens to you when you don't have enough iron in your diet. And there are a number of very interesting changes that we notice in human beings with this change from hunting gathering to agriculture. All hunter-gatherers basically have their heads in this position, and all farmers have their heads in this position. So we all actually have our heads normally resting in this position and not this one, because since we aren't hunter-gatherers any longer, we don't need to keep scanning the horizon. So biologically we have evolved now to look down, because we're looking down at food. We're not looking up at food in the distance any longer. So this is again where archaeozoology and paleoanthropology come together. This is one of the earliest burials that we have of a farming community in the Indian subcontinent, and the person was buried with 6 baby goats for the afterlife. So just in case it was a long journey, there was enough meat to last. So the archaeologists also play a little role in helping their scientist friends. And their figurines, pots showing fish on them, statuettes, paintings, seals, locks, coins. So there are various different sources from which you can pick up what the contemporary animals and the contemporary food was like. You also get this. So these are the earliest known tandoors in India, and they are at least 4,500 years old, and they're from the side of Kalibangan. So tandoori roti, tandoori chicken, happening, and a lot of fish happening on the coast of Gujarat. Now this is really weird because we get tons and tons of evidence of Gujaratis on the coast eating fish. Going out to sea, 8 to 10 kilometers. Imagine, in those days that's an enormous distance. It's almost out of sight of land completely. Okay? To hunt catfish that were 8 to 10 feet long. We have their bones. We have these huge hooks for them. And the same areas are now completely vegetarian. The mind boggles. But, well, to each his own, right? And then we have interesting stuff like this. So the lady with the leopards might find this interesting. So on the outskirts of the large Harappan cities where they were drying their bricks, we get all kinds of animals that ran across these bricks. So in one house where the bricks probably came from one place, we have a number of bricks showing dog tracks and bricks showing leopard tracks. So outskirts, dogs, leopards. So this is a typical leopard track over here. Okay, and we have some rabbit traps and lots of dog tracks and cat tracks running across. And the guy in the morning just piles them all up and bakes them in any case. Who's going to go through the whole thing again? So we also have food habits that come out of the vessels that we eat out of. So when we work in Karnataka, there's this line that divides North and South Karnataka in archaeology. In all the burials in northern Karnataka, you get plates. In all the burials in southern Karnataka, you get bowls. The difference is essentially ragi is eaten as chapatis, okay, as flatbreads in northern Karnataka, and it's made into balls as mudde in southern Karnataka. So that's something we've been seeing for the last 3,000 years. It isn't recent. Sadly, they almost stopped eating ragi in Karnataka these days. It's considered very down market. Rural people eat ragi. It's the same thing in Maharashtra. Maharashtra is one of the biggest ragi growing places along with Karnataka. We call it nachni over here. And the people who grew nachni have stopped growing it because of the most bizarre reason possible. If you eat a lot of nachni, when you go to the loo, it's black colored. So, they said we stopped growing nachni because we were continuously teased that we were lower caste people and our shit was black because we were lower caste. And we ate low caste food. So we all want to eat rice, which is high caste food. Now this is the bummer. Rice has almost no protein in it. Rice is nothing but starch. It's the stupidest thing you could eat. Okay? But you don't want to eat nachni, you don't want to eat jowar, you don't want to eat bajra, you want to eat rice. Why? So you don't shit black. Okay. So, this is from Gujarat, and this also tells you about how much porridge was eaten in Gujarat. All the Harappan cultures of Gujarat use bowls. Nowhere else in the Harappan Empire do we see bowls of this magnitude. But in Gujarat it becomes so big that they actually create something called a stud handle bowl. So from one corner of the bowl you have a little handle coming out, so you can put your thumb around it and hold your bowl directly when you're eating out of it. So you don't have to hold the bottom of the bowl which is hot. I like these Gujaratis. You know what it is. So about 1800 years ago, there were these really nasty people called the Parthians who beat the crap out of the Romans. And by doing so, windfall happened in Maharashtra. Funny, right? Guys in Persia beating the Romans in Turkey and windfall in Maharashtra. What basically happened was they cut off the silk route, carrying silk and other goods from China to Rome. So business is business, right? So the trade route diverted itself through India, came across to Bharuch and Kalyan and Thana, and shipped out of the ports of Western Maharashtra out to the Red Sea, up from the Red Sea and back to Rome. Maybe at twice the cost, but the goods were still getting there. So the Satavahana dynasty in Maharashtra, the first really big dynasty, comes up because of the Indo-Roman trade. And they're really canny people. They actually believe that everything that the Romans make is substandard. So there's a kind of reverse snobbery as opposed to what we do today, and we think the West is better. So they didn't want anything that the Romans were giving them back in trade. All they wanted was rokda. And they said, by the way, you guys make some decent wines, so you can keep sending some wine over. So we have all these beautiful amphora fragments that we excavate from these sites. And this is a typical amphora that comes from Rome. And the nice thing is that almost every one of these places that made wine and put it into amphoras had a typical type of amphora. So we can tell which period, which region of Italy these amphoras are coming from. And we actually get the remains in these Canaanite and Roman amphorae of the residue of wine after 1800 years. It actually got so bad that in the 4th century AD, Marcus Aurelius begged the people of Rome to stop buying the Indian purple, which was the indigo-dyed cotton and silk that was coming out of India, because Rome was becoming bankrupt. And then in the end of the 4th century AD, Maharashtra insidiously destroyed the Roman Empire by bleeding it dry of every single paisa that it had. Seriously, guys. Maharashtra also killed the dinosaurs, but that's another story. Look up my FB page. You'll find the link for that. So, we also use a lot of rock art to see the kind of animals that were being hunted. We also use other kinds of art that we see depicting things. So, for all of you who've grown up reading Asterix comics and all those slaves pulling blocks to make the pyramids and believe that slaves built the pyramids, that's an absolute hoot. There was an entire town that existed there of absolutely free people, and they were virtually communists. It was a huge communally run setup. They had huge kitchens and camps and things like that, and they built pyramids for those crazy guys who wanted them built. And these are typical images of their mass kitchens and some of the earliest bread being baked in these pots. And luckily for us archaeologists, one of these pots kind of got overcooked. Some poor lazy guy forgot to take the bread out of the oven. So there's one pot with nicely charred, carbonized bread that we've been able to excavate. So we actually have the bread too. I mean, not that we can eat it, but it's there. So, how different is our diet from the diet that we had then? Vastly different. For one, the kind of choices that we have today didn't exist then. Two, the kind of foods that we eat now come from all over the world and are grown in greenhouses out of season. So all you guys like ketchup? Oh yeah? Ketchup? With your fries? Yes. With your burger? Yes. Okay, some of them don't like it. You know why ketchup came about? It came about because tomatoes were seasonal. And if you wanted them to last through the year, you had to bottle the burgers. So you made ketchup. Jam didn't come about so that you could eat it for breakfast. It was a way of preserving fruit. Cheese was a way of preserving milk. So it was making a product last which wouldn't be available all the time. And that is what we were essentially doing. So diets were mono diets. Diets may have been boring. There were enormous amounts of porridges and gruels and breads. And essentially that was what made up most of our diets. Along with a little bit of meat or a little bit of fish, some dal, some veggies. But a lot of it would be locally grown. So today we are completely dependent on processed foods. If I sent you out on this, there's quite a bit of a forest behind you guys here, and if I sent you out and said look for stuff that you can eat, I'm pretty sure that most of you guys would come back and say there's nothing you can eat over here. And you'd be surprised at how many edible plants actually grow, even in urban neighborhoods. So there's tons and tons of stuff that you can actually eat. In small farming communities, even today, there is food that grows around farms, food that goes between farms, between fields, that is continuously utilized to supplement the food that you're eating. So for example, at the end of May, when I'm excavating at the site called Changlore every year, I have people going absolutely ape when they see one pale white shoot coming out of the ground, they call it sheval. And it's an absolute delicacy. And they cook it with meat and they cook it with dried prawns and things like that. And the moment one is seen, it's like every single one is snapped up. You don't wait for 5 or 6. You don't say, I'll let it grow a little more tomorrow. Somebody has to pick it up. There's no tomorrow. So these are absolutely wild plants that grow and are harvested regularly by people. And people who harvest them know where they are likely to grow. Okay? So that's an insidious or indirect manner in which we are cultivating those plants. There's a lot of talk about foreign superfoods and things like that. And there's world, one market, food now going across. So you can get tuna that was caught in Tsukiji market and displayed there. 12 hours later, it's on your table at Morimoto's in Taj Mahal, and you say, oh my god, I ate this amazing tuna and I paid like 15,000 bucks to eat it. Ouch. Ouch. There's gorgeous tuna that's caught every day by our fishermen and brought to the markets. Only they don't call it tuna. See, the local name for it is kuppa. And most people who go and buy fish don't buy it because it's a dark red meat. But when that same thing is put in a little piece this big on overcooked, overboiled rice, okay, and called sushi, you pay an arm and a leg for it. So it's like really weird. You talk about free-range animals and free-range meat that you're importing from Australia, where 99.9% of the lamb that you eat in India, the goat that you eat in India, the mutton that you eat in India is free-range to start off with. We don't have goat farms. I mean, the government's trying desperately to start them up, but nobody really seems to be interested. So we don't really have farm meat. We've been eating free-range meat forever. So picking up a fad, picking up a foreign food, calling it a superfood, and these are some of the things that absolutely get my goat. So at the moment, in the last year or so, the biggest superfood in the market in Bombay is something called quinoa, spelled Quinoa. It comes from the Andean highlands. It was a local staple for poor farmers till somebody decided to package it really well and sell it to people all over the world. So now those poor farmers don't have enough quinoa to eat for themselves because it's being sold at ridiculous, never heard before prices, and gullible people all across, including people in India, buying it from Nature's Basket and saying, my god, it's amazing, so low in gluten and it's got 14% protein. So has every single Indian millet. So does nachni, jowar, bajra, wari, harik. But you don't want to eat these. Don't knock it. Make your poo look black. Or something, some ridiculous thing like that, right? You don't want to eat those. You want to eat quinoa. Or I eat kale chips. That's another big thing. Kale is a superfood. It's cabbage. It's just a dark green cabbage. There's tons of cabbage going on in the place. Kale has vitamin K. So does cabbage and cauliflower, broccoli and Brussels sprouts. But you don't want to eat those, do you? It's so down market to say, I ate cabbage chips. It's so cool to say, I'm having some kale chips. So this is absolutely, totally fundamentally freaks me out, okay? I get totally worked up about this. So these are Indian millets. And a lot of these just don't exist in our minds any longer. We wouldn't recognize these if we saw them growing. Very often they grow on bus stops because they're fed to birds and birds poop them out. And you see these long, tall guys, thingies growing on bus stops, on the corners of roads with these large ears of grain on top of them. And you just pass them by thinking they're wild. I figured out that just on the highway from Panvel to Bilapur, I can probably harvest enough bajra to put away about 20 kilos. Just by snipping it off the highway. Seriously, guys. Okay? So, we feed it to animals. And there's numbers of millets that were very high in minerals and things like that we just stopped eating. So, for example, there's something called kahang that used to grow in Maharashtra, almost disappeared. How many Maharashtrians here? So, how many of you guys eat wari? Wari chetandul? Guess what? Most of your wari comes from Rajasthan. Because if you aren't growing it in Maharashtra any longer, the farmers in Rajasthan don't eat it. They grew it for the crazy Maharashtrians who are paying premium for it. Because it's upas as a tandul. They cook it like rice on the upas day. You enjoy it, but you don't eat it on your regular days, do you? Farmers don't want to grow it. So there's tons and tons of superfood and super grain back home. It's just that we aren't eating it. Okay? So this is bajra, that's jowar, that's kahang over here, this is nachni, and this is koro millet basically over here, other kinds of millet, and this is rajgir. So if you call it rajgir, you don't want to eat it. But when it comes packaged from South America and says amaranth seeds, then you toast them and sprinkle them on your salad. It costs 6 times what rajgir costs. So yeah, I mean, crazy. People seem to have money for these fads, but the tragedy is that it's very healthy to actually eat. It actually is healthy. And there's tons of it growing right around us. Do you know what one of the greatest superfoods on this planet is? Bear. We've been eating it in India for the last 7,000 years. It's got more iron, more vitamin C and more minerals packed into it than probably anything on this planet apart from spirulina. And there's no vitamin C in spirulina. But it's cheap. You get it all at school and college and the guy on the road sells it. It's not cool to eat it. I mean, you don't offer your girlfriend a packet of beer. Then look at you, this cheapo. So you take her out and you feed her some junk at McDonald's. And now she knows you really love her. So, hello. So this simple thing, this bear, all over the coast, people would dry it in summer and then actually add it to rotis in the rains. And so I don't like bear, by the way. I can't stand the smell. But those dried bear powder mixed with jowar and turned into these little bhakris that look like biscuits are some of the most delicious things you can eat. So it's got your 14% protein grain plus half of it is crushed dried bear powder, which is concentrated iron, vitamin C, and all kinds of minerals and stuff that you really need to have. But you don't want to eat it because kind of lives in a village eats it. Yeah. Does it look like pizza from Domino's? With multicolored capsicum on it and baby corn. So archaeologists use a seriously multi-pronged approach to try and look at food and the different things that we ate and to figure out what made us what we are. And it helps us reconstruct our lifestyles, it helps us understand our environment, it helps us understand environmental change, it helps us understand our adaptations. And if there's one thing that archaeology teaches you, and it definitely taught me this, is that human beings are incredibly adaptable. We are like a pest, a virus that isn't going away. I mean, if you think cockroaches are hardy, I think human beings are just as hardy. There is absolutely no way to get rid of us. And the other thing that food habits and archaeology taught me was, every time people get upset and worked about climate change, oh my God, climate change is coming. It's the great boogeyman. The sea levels in Bombay rose by 5 centimeters in the last 20 years. So as an archaeologist, I tell them, yeah, but 16,000 years ago when the ice sheets melted, the world sea levels rose by 160 meters. 160 meters. We're still around. Okay? Whatever nature seems to throw at us, we're one step ahead of the game, guys. Just can't eradicate us. I mean, we live out there in Alaska, across into the Arctic Circle. Why would anybody want to live there? But the Eskimos, they thrive there. We live in the middle of the Sahara Desert and in the middle of the empty quarter, okay, where the temperature is like 54 degrees centigrade. So if we can live in all these places and we can live in the Sundarbans with tigers regularly eating people up, and we can live in urban cities and sprawls like this, we can live everywhere. So human beings are incredibly adaptable, and one of the reasons is that we have made sure that our dietary pattern is incredibly flexible. And that's the ultimate lesson that the archaeology of food teaches you. That human beings can survive on such an enormous variety of foods, okay, and thrive on them, that very, very few other species can. The only other species that can probably eat as much variety as humans do and thrive as well are pigs. Guys, we can swap livers with them in emergencies, okay, and keep going for about 15 days or so. So that definitely goes to show there's some kind of relationship there. So every time your mother looked at you and said, "Don't act like a pig," so, ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens sometimes when you go out hunting and you aren't fast. But that said, thank you very much for being such a good audience.
Thank you. I think the only thing the audience stopped short of is saying once more.
Next year.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, Kurush. I think I'm sure there will be questions for Kurush in the audience, so we can. Yeah. So we'll start here. One.
Yeah, thank you, Kurush.
Pleasure.
Wonderful lecture, and you told us so much about food. Thank you for that. I'm curious about drinks, and I'm curious as to what did the ancient Indians drink,
Okay, so
because today we drink tea, coffee, sharbat, etc. which did
the
not
coffee
exist.
story is a really funky story. Um, Tea is an incredibly recent drink, and we've been drinking tea in India probably for as little as 200 years. I know, it's really bizarre that in 200 years it's become something that's permeated all over. It's essentially a Chinese drink, and we don't even drink it like the Chinese drink it. So we've absolutely murdered it as far as the Chinese are concerned. And you and I probably couldn't drink Chinese, all smell, no taste tea. But whatever. Okay, so you want your tea strong and you want it kadak. And if you're from Maharashtra, you want it to be like gulab jamun shira. But I used to get used to that at one time, but nowadays it's difficult. So essentially a lot of juice, a lot of coconut milk and things like that. Milk was a big thing, but the number one beverage consumed was water. As far as intoxicants are concerned, toddy and madi were very, very popular all across India and was one of the number one fermented drinks. Different alcoholic beverages were made. Most of them were fermented, and we have a beautiful reference to them in the Arthashastra of Kautilya, which goes back about 2,300 years, where he talks about how it was taxed, and even goes on to tell us that on the third day, which is normally any fermenting, quick fermenting thing like toddy or madi, you drink on the first day, on the second day you can, on the third day it's impossible. So he actually talks about how that was fed to the pigs, okay, and not to be mixed with the fresh stock and passed off. So definitely toddy and madi were very much part of it. And one of the good things about India is that the gods are very happy khata pita log. There's no deprivation business going on. So this upas business is all very recent. You have this really, I think the coolest deity that exists on the planet is Shiva. So, he smokes grass. He's regularly knocking it down by the bottle full. He goes out hunting wild boar. He wears leopard, deer skin lungis and sleeps on tiger skins and stuff like that. So he's like totally the rad Conan kind of guy. And one of the most famous drinks that came out of India was something called Soma. And Indra was actually called Soma, that's one of his names. And Somras is what we call most alcoholic beverages technically in India. So Soma was essentially a plant, which was a hallucinogenic plant called ephedra. And the Iranians also used a lot of it. They called it Homa in the Avesta. So right from Vedic times, that would be at least 3,000 years ago, there has been a tradition of making and drinking Soma and making and drinking different rasas. And Ayurveda actually, almost every single Ayurvedic tonic is 3% alcohol. Most of us never read the small print. But all the asavas, the Kumari asav and this asav and that asav, is at least 3% alcohol. That's what keeps it from going bad. Okay, that's what acts as a base for it. So alcoholic produce was definitely known, and like I said, taddy muddy was the common man's drink. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think we have a question.
Good evening to all. I am Chandrasekhar from Bangalore. Today, this glorious auditorium, I would like to express my feeling towards my country and country people. We developed ourselves modern style of living and losing our health because all types of foods available in India, vegetables, many types of vegetables. Preparation is different and getting different state. Further, I would like to say that freezing food is not good for health. When we are putting in the fridge, that it lose the ingredients of the.
Maybe I would
It
know.
is practically it is very experienced. I am experienced long back. You put a apple in fridge and you put another apple outside and see the taste on the very next day. It will lose the ingredient, the fruit side, all vegetables, everything. But anyhow, as per my knowledge, I am the world member of Engineering Congress. Wish to state that our type of living is different. We are lazy because we are depend on all works on electricity. So we must work hard and our organs should function and whatever you eat that will be digested. Yeah. Anyhow, you do hard work and we must conserve natural resources, water and electricity, food as well as earth from global warming. That article brought me to the world member of Engineering Congress, and we must protect women's also. That is different. This one on food. You must hard work and eat everything. Even we can be anyhow. Come on, next day I will say.
All my life, I've been protecting myself from women. Okay? My grandmother, my mother. I think I'll. Considering who's in the audience.
Kurush, there's a question here.
Hello.
Good evening, Dr. Dalal.
Good evening.
Never realized archaeology could be made so interesting, and archaeology food as a combination. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you.
Just one question: when did we make the transition from hunter-gatherer to farmer, and when did we make the transition from vegetarian? How did India become such a vegetarian-centric country? Is that an archaeology?
That's a very good question, and there are 3 or 4 factors. The first thing, we started becoming an agricultural powerhouse somewhere around 10,000 years ago. We shifted from hunting gathering to plant and animal domestication. It was a long process. It didn't happen everywhere at the same time. So parts of India, it happened later, parts of India, it happened earlier, parts of India were more conducive to agriculture. So the river valleys, after the semi-arid regions, it was the river valleys that were majorly penetrated because farming is possible in these regions. So that's how the forests and the mountains were the last to be really colonized by farmers. And that happened as recently as about 1,000 years ago in a lot of places. In some places it just didn't happen. As far as vegetarianism is concerned, vegetarianism has 2-3 factors. The first is that large-scale animal husbandry is not possible when a population grows beyond a certain point. So you start relying more and more on plant resources, and you husband and take very good care of your animal resources. You restrict their use as such. The other problem is you just can't cut a cow because you feel like eating some mutton. I mean, there's a lot of cow, right? What do you do with the rest of it? So a cow would be slaughtered when there would be enough people to eat it. And a cow per se would not be slaughtered because the milk coming out of the cow would be far more beneficial in the long term than the meat of the cow. It's the chicken with the golden egg syndrome. So it would essentially be young calves, and it would be male animals, excessive male animals that would be slaughtered. The Rig Veda talks about it. In fact, one of the shlokas in the Rig Veda says that if you are visited by an important visitor a sant visits you, then the best thing that you can give to a rishi is the meat of a young calf. I know, it's a great, be horrifying revelation for a lot of people who think that the Vedas are vegetarian. The Vedas are not vegetarian at all. All the Vedic people are very happy beef eating people. They have no problems like that. The prescription against meat actually starts with the rise of Buddhism and Jainism as an opposition to Brahmanism. So it's a religious conflict thing, and meat eating kind of falls by the way because ahimsa is one of the tenets of both Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism. And you actually have this in one of the Ashokan edicts where Ashoka says that he has now decided to, bring down the amount of meat that is being consumed in the royal kitchens, and that henceforth only 2 peacocks and 1 deer will be killed every day. So one wonders about how much was actually being killed before he said that. Not to mention, we also learned from that edict that soup is actually an Indian word, because the 2 peacocks are going to be turned into super. So vegetarianism catches on there, and it's subsequently with the rise of Vaishnavism, actually, and the Dashavatara theory sometime in the 10th century AD, that vegetarianism actually becomes very, very rampant. Till that period, vegetarianism is not really a concept. The other thing is that if you actually do a serious study, more than 65% of India is meat eating. It's just that we don't look at the numbers in the non-urban settings. We only look at numbers in the urban settings. And that's a fallacy that we've got to get around. The other thing is that there are tons and tons of people who eat beef, they eat buffalo, and they eat pork. And everybody thinks that, it's only lamb and mutton that's really consumed in India. Almost every single coastal population from southern Gujarat to Bengal eats fish. So, vegetarian doesn't really exist on the coast. Bengali Brahmins eat fish. Bengali Brahmins actually also eat mutton at least once a year when Prasad comes back from the Kali Puja. And they cook it without garlic or onions, and they call it vegetarian mutton. Seriously guys, Niramish Mangsho. Ask your Bengali friends about it. Tastes yum. Cooked with ginger and lots of ghee. Okay, so, there are always ways to work around vegetarianism. The other thing you've got to realize is that they're actually not vegetarian in this country. So there is now a very famous European term, we are lacto-vegetarians, or ovo-lacto-vegetarians, as in we eat eggs, we drink milk and eat milk products. Understand this, if we were not lacto-vegetarians, there would not be very many Indians left. You require a certain set of B vitamins that comes only from animal produce. You can only get them through milk. If you don't, you got to take vitamin supplements. So every vegan is actually somebody who is dependent on chemicals. So if they're anti-chemical, anti this and anti that, I don't see how they're vegan if they're popping pills on the side. But that's their thing. I don't understand. See guys, honestly, I mean, this is probably going to not get me very many brownie points, but I don't understand vegetarianism. I love vegetables. No, I love vegetables, seriously guys. Most of the food I eat is vegetarian, but I don't understand vegetarianism. But fair enough, to each his own. You want to be vegetarian? That's cool. Don't shove it down my throat. So militant vegetarian Nazism is something that I don't get. And I see a lot of it around. How can you kill animals? And then I'll get some video of some animal being slaughtered and baying its life away. And I'm like, would you like me to send you pictures of carrots being peeled alive by graters, their skin shredded off? What is it? It's food. Get over it. Okay, you don't think twice about taking a slipper and bashing a cockroach. Does that make you a murderer? No. Reality, you don't want pests in your house. So, vegetarianism is it's a state of mind more than anything else. And to each his own, like I said. You do your thing, let me do my thing. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a question right up there. Isha, just take the mic.
It's a good thing there are no speakers after me.
It's been a great presentation.
Thank you.
Just wanted to know that a lot of foods have happened in time. Like say the Rajasthani is having the dal bati or foods in Maharashtra, wherever. But then when these people come to a place, say like Mumbai, and have the same foods like which may have also been dependent on your occupation in those times. You know, I mean, most of them were to do with fields, very hard
Hard work, labor.
and now when we are just sitting on the computers and doing nothing actually. So how do these foods adapt in today's time and to this climate?
Number one, your food intake should be related. I mean, look at me talking. It should be related to the amount of energy that your body requires and you can expend. So logically, you should be eating maybe a little less than you need. That's logically. Let's face it. Essentially, genetically, okay, we never had enough food. So our bodies were tuned to storing food. Think of it, traditionally in India, someone who's a chubby baby, okay, is the optimal baby. You don't want a lean, mean baby, you want a chubby baby. So you go to Punjab and they'll tell you, he's not fat, yaar, he's just healthy. Just as much you go to rest of India and they'll say, you're looking very prosperous. And you're looking fat, yes. So what is the whole thing? So you're relating excess body weight, okay, with prosperity. It means you can afford to eat more. You know, you can afford to eat more than you basically just require. You have transcended that threshold of just eating as much as you require to survive. So yes, traditional foods are maybe not always feasible in today's day and age, but that's essentially because you aren't exercising enough. And there are maybe a million ways to exercise. And take it from me as somebody who really can't walk and for whom with the degenerative knee it's getting worse and worse. It's only when you can't walk that you really appreciate walking and you curse all those people who can walk and don't. But then that's, you know, tough. People look at you and say, you aren't walking, why are you telling us to walk? But you can walk upstairs, you can walk downstairs, okay? You can make sure that you pick up things one at a time and keep going back for them. You can get out of your chair and do simple exercises sitting in your chair. And you can just make sure that you eat as much as you require. Cut down the carbs. It's as simple as that. Cut down the carbs, increase your protein. You'll do fine with the same diet. It's just quantity, it's just weightage. So dal bati churma, eat less bati and less churma, eat lots more dal. Yeah, it might not be very good for your neighbors, but yeah, it'll be good for you. Anybody else? It's not always possible to eat traditional foods everywhere. You know, like kher sangri from Rajasthan, getting it down fresh to Bombay is not always possible. Of course, in today's day and age with air transport and things like that, yes it is. Takes the fun out of eating it back home. Anybody else?
Right, any more questions? One more question.
Okay, last question. Before we let Pojino go home.
Hi. I just want you to put some light on the dessert because in India, in many places we eat before the meal and sometimes now we eat after the meal. So,
Okay.
how
Okay, depending on which part of India and even in which part of India, which part of society you belong to hierarchically, desserts have very, very different meanings. Example from coastal Maharashtra. In coastal Maharashtra, there is no concept such as dessert traditionally. Sugar was in incredibly short supply. Whatever milk there was consumed. There was no excess milk. As a result, the traditional desserts of coastal Maharashtra are rava ladus, methi ladus, dink ladu. Sometimes dink and methi together is a bizarre combination according to me, but whatever. And besan ladu. and these are made specifically. Diwali Farar. Okay, Diwali Farar is made just before Diwali. What does it mean? It's the end of the harvest, you have a little surplus. So you celebrate it. So it's essentially laddu and kheer. These are the only two things. Ladus are made for specifically for religious events. Okay? Kheer is made to celebrate events within the family. That's it. There is no dessert. The Indian concept of dessert is essentially a Ganga Valley concept to a large extent where there is surplus milk and that milk is being turned into dessert, and it has a lot to do with the coming of Islam and the Islamization of our food. That Islamization penetrates all kinds of food, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, this way and that way. I mean, your Punjabi samosa, it basically comes from Turkey. Okay? And it came because of the Islamic invasion of India. Otherwise, there would be no Punjabi samosas in India. There's nothing Punjabi about the four things. Okay? So, yeah, it's like that. So, desserts are not really a very, very traditional Indian thing unless there is a important occasion in the family or there is a religious occasion. So, this concept of eating desserts is one of the big reasons why, as this gentleman was saying, we are putting on a lot of weight sitting on our fat to she's in offices. Because sugar is now very, very easily available. Okay, India has been a little better off for sugar, but let me give you an example. 400 years ago in Europe, white crystallized sugar that we get today and all of us use like it's just part of the landscape was like cocaine. It was like cocaine today. It was that expensive. It was made in very, very small batches out of beets by chemists sitting in meth labs, as they would be today. So what is that guy Breaking Bad who's really hot amongst your guys? He'd probably be peddling sugar. Yeah, no brown sugar, just sugar. So sugar was very, very difficult to come by. Rich people ate sweet meats. Poor people got fruit if they were lucky. And that's if they were lucky. Mainly they ate beer. So dessert isn't really a very Indian thing. And that's why it becomes very difficult to slot it into Indian food. Where do you put it? You just put it in the thali, eat it at the beginning. Dessert never really comes by at the end of the meal. That's a very Persian, Iranian thing that comes to India. Finishing the meal with something sweet. The term actually in Persian is to repair the mouth. Okay? So you're repairing the mouth after your meal. So whatever you've eaten, whatever spices and meats you partaken and oils, you're cleansing your mouth at the end of your meal with your dessert. So it's a very, very outside India concept that came to India about 1,000 years ago, and the Indians took to it like ducks to water. Yeah, we all have incredibly sweet teeth. Archaeologists, when they look at Indian samples, we have archaeologists coming from abroad to study Indian teeth. Because they say European teeth are boring, they're just teeth. Look at the kind of funky cavities your guys have. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think I should call it a night.
Yeah, go on. But do you have any idea what the time is? It's 10:45. It's been a really long evening. Thank you so much, Kurush.
Thank you very much for having me here. It was a pleasure.